don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure that was a Bigfoot. Let me tell you a story. These stories are based upon true events. Welcome to another Bigfoot Campfire Story. Sometimes an encounter with Bigfoot is amazing, and yet other times it will scare people nearly to death. This story is one of the latter, and frankly, gives me the creeps. Marty Steve and Jerry wanted to go camping for a week near Yosemite National Park. Backpacking and hiking the trails seemed like the fun adventure for the summer, but things went a bit off track. I heard the story first time about 5 years after it happened. Now, I'll share it with you. Being middle-class kids from north of Las Vegas, Marty, Steve, and I decided a summer between high school and college we'd drive over to Yosemite National Park and camp and hike for a week before we had to pack off and ship off to college. See, we had all been together since we were 8. I moved into the neighborhood and met Marty and Steve the first day I went to class. We were all TMNT fans, so it was destiny that we could all be friends. Anyhow, we all lived on the same street. I can't remember a time when one of these two nuts hadn't been by my side for nearly everything worth remembering in my life. But now we were about to all go off to different schools. Kinda sucks growing up, but that is what happens. So this would be the last epic trip that we would have for some time. None of us had a car worth of crap, but Steve's dad had gone to California for the summer and mistakenly left his 4x4 Chevy Blazer keys on the rack, so that problem was now solved. We had planned on being back 3 days before him, so it shouldn't be a problem. He never actually said not to use the car, so why not? The next morning, we all met at Steve's place to head out for our trip. The Blazer had a ton of cargo room, but we had packed plenty of times our gear, so it was pretty small. Food and water took up most space. Yosemite to Vegas was a mere 7-hour trip, so 5 a.m. we met up, and by 7 we were gone. Steve had gotten directions to get us into Ptolemy Grove, and we would hike into Hodgdon Meadow and back. With plenty of watering holes along the way, we really only arrived and got ready once we got parked. On the Blazer, we left a note. Marty had made it. It was all the details in our plans. When we started, how long we planned to be gone, when we intended to return. A tip we learned online, at least somebody would be looking for us should we not return. We left the same note with my mom and Marty's aunt. We'd all taken plenty of trips together, from desert campings to a trip to the Pacific Crest Trail. With Marty's uncle, this should be the chance for us to use all of our skills put together. We got going about 4 in the afternoon, and this being summer, there was plenty of light left, so we headed up the trail to find a spot to camp for the night. We managed to get into a spot to camp just before dusk, and just before dark, we were getting a fire going and ready to cook. All of us had brought tons of those bagged meals, so we heated up some and watered down, chowed around the fire flames. And before too long, the stories broke out. Marty started out with a tale of a missing hiker on this trail. For years, there were rumors of some sort of abduction or even alien intervention. But that, of course, had to have been made up. That we were sure of. Steve told of a couple camping in the park and had forgotten to put up their food at night and had gotten drunk and sloppy and ended up getting eaten by a bear. But to top them all off, I spoke of a tale of Sasquatch in these mountains right here. Since we were kids in the desert, the Bigfoot fascinated us like no other creature. I remembered hearing stories from old TV shows. With as much about wildlife and protected lands, there could certainly be something out here. This was how each day came and went for nearly 4 days. We'd cover 6 to 10 miles a day. It wasn't until we were just a few nights from the trailhead that things began to get very weird. It was Tuesday night, and we were getting pretty low on food, with just a few packs each, so we slowed down our eating, but that wasn't such a good idea, as earlier and earlier we'd find each day that we were getting tired. We were beat, and we had only made it about 6 miles before Marty rolled his ankle, and we really had to slow down again. Well, we looked on the map and noticed there was a creek nearby, so we beat off trail just a little bit to get some cold water on his ankle in hopes that it wouldn't swell up that much. We reached the creek in about an hour, but Marty's ankle was already angry and red, puffy, He couldn't barely touch it, let alone put any weight on it. So we dropped our packs and got him to the creek to chill the swelling and help with the pain. Steve went back for the packs as we had a couple of first aid kits in them. We would have to stabilize his ankle and help him walk out in the morning. It wasn't broken, just really sore. Hopefully a night of dipping it in the creek will make it all better. We set up a small camp right there at the bank of the river and got his ankle set away and broke out and ate like little pigs. We figured we'd fuel up and try to make it all the way out tomorrow. If we started at first light, we'd surely make it. We had drifted off to sleep one at a time, as we were all exhausted from the day. All of us except poor Marty, of course. He was in some serious pain. He sat and fed on the small fire and took trips to the creek to soak his foot. As he sat at the creek, he heard some animal noises coming his way. Not sure what they were, he sat still, hoping to get a view of some majestic stag or maybe an elk. If it was a bear, he was screwed, but as luck would have it, it was none of those things. Just as his eye focused on the newest sounds, his eyes let him see what he thought for sure never existed. A myth? A legend? Sure enough, a small Bigfoot. It was only 4.5 or 5 feet tall, but as the stories say, covered in hair, long goofy arms with powerful legs, and a face very much like a man. It hadn't seen Marty sitting, and soon enough he had heard a deeper call from a similar animal, and the little one ran off. Marty, amazed at what he had just saw, scrambled back to camp and woke us all up. He told us about seeing the small Bigfoot and hearing a louder, deeper one, and then watching the small one run off. Intrigued by the sighting, Steve and I went down to the creek to have a look around. There was a log down that crossed the creek just yards upstream, so we walked over it and lit up the area where Marty had seen the creature. As we just got about to give up on the search for any signs, Steve found a set of tracks coming in and going out of Marty's view from the creek. About 11 inches long and 6 inches wide, you could see where it had picked up and run, and then the tracks just stopped as the tree litter on the forest floor. So we went back across the creek and all went back to camp. The rest of the night it was hard to sleep, knowing that Bigfoot was real, and not only that, but they were living right around us. Granted, we were a little off trail, but only by 3/4 of a mile, not some great distance as I had always figured. No, they seemed to be able to hide right in plain sight. It seemed that though the night we would hear some sounds in the darkness, and we would flash the lights all around, we searched the area, but saw nothing the rest of the night. As dawn broke, we ate once again, leaving just a couple of meals between us, so making the distance would be important. Marty's ankle started out okay, so we packed up and began to make the trip out. We took as much weight off of Marty's pack as we could, but even with that, we had to stop every couple of miles for a rest. At sunset, once again, we knew staying the night was the only way. Not only some 12 miles from the truck, we would most certainly make it out tomorrow, so we set up camp and split up the last of the meals we had between us and ate and sat around the fire. This had been an epic trip with ups and downs, and at one point I thought Marty was going to beat Steve to death over who was better, The Rock or Goldberg, but it all worked out the same. Just as it had gotten really dark outside, a very strong animal smell came up on the wind. Nothing that we had encountered so far on this trip. Almost like a skunk, but not really, and then it would pass. This happened several times over the course of a couple of hours. It was odd, for sure. Well, Steve had gotten up to go to the bathroom, and he took his flashlight with him. It wasn't but a few minutes before he came back into camp without a word, kind of shaking and pointing backwards towards where he came. Finally, after collecting himself, he said one word: Sasquatch. Great, I thought. Now both of them had seen one, but I had not. Then he said, huge and scary. So Marty and I got up and lit the area up, but of course there was nothing to see. Just then we smelled that same odor on the air, but heard no movement. So again we went back into camp. Think of the luck. Most of my best friends see 2 different Bigfoot on this trip. Maybe I too would get lucky yet. As the night went on, we noticed that, unlike other nights, there was no moon at all. It had gotten cloudy, and nearly all the animal sounds had ceased around us. Then, as if on cue, we heard that same sound Marty had heard the first time from the big one. Only this wasn't far off. It seemed to be right near us. Then again, from the other side of camp, another call out from a big one, and then a third, and then a fourth, much smaller. We were surrounded indeed. We all stood up, lighting the area around camp the best we could. The animals kept moving from tree to tree. They would get out of sight, and then they would make a call. Then moments later, they would move again. We couldn't keep track of them all. Finally, Steve lit up a big one in full beam of his light, and it looked directly at us. Just as it did, a small one ran up beside it. They both made a call and then ran off into the night. And with that, the activity stopped. We were very much afraid of these animals. They made it very clear that we were intruding on their space. Finally, the sun came up. We packed up and left the area just as fast as we could. Somehow, Marty's ankle was much better today, and we started hiking out as fast as we could. About 6 hours later, we reached the parking lot. All the way home, we talked about what happened. Just who could we trust with this information that wouldn't think we were nuts? Finally, Marty's other uncle used to talk about Bigfoot. We'd drive over to his place right away and tell him about it. Well, Marty called him on the way home, and Bill told us to come over right away as he was excited to hear what happened. We made our usual calls home to alert everyone that we were fine, that we would be home later that day. But off to Bill it was. He was just a few more hours away. Well, Bill was out in the driveway when we got there, just as Marty had described. He was an old Vietnam vet, paranoid about the government cover-ups and just who shot JFK. So him sunning himself in the yard in OD green shorts under an American flag, looking like Lieutenant Dan on a good day, made total sense. We all busted into the basement, into his headquarters, as he called it. He broke out an old tape recorder and set it on the circular table, and we all sat down around it. He clicks play and record at the same time, and we begin to tell him the story. Through all the details and his follow-up questions, we went through nearly 2 90-minute tapes. It was well dark outside by the time we emerged from the basement. Bill thanked us for trusting him with the eyewitness account and promised he would guard it with his life, to which I had no doubt he would. He advised that we didn't talk about it to anyone, but even if the government showed up to torture us, it wasn't worth all that would happen if we talked. With that, we loaded up in the Blazer once more and headed for home. Lofton wasn't that far from Vegas, so it wasn't long before Steve pulled into his driveway and the adventure was over. Over the next couple of weeks, Steve was kind of a ghost. His dad had found out we took the Blazer and had gotten him in a lot of heat, so we hadn't seen him until his grounding was over. Finally, he came by, and he didn't look good at all. He came clean that he hadn't had a good night's sleep since we got back. He told me that when he had seen the big Sasquatch by himself, something happened to him. It wasn't that he had seen it from far off. It came up to him, knocked him to the ground, and then stood over him on 2 legs and 1 arm. It growled at him and snorted, and then drooled that hit him directly in the face. It smacked all around him as if trying to figure out what he was, before letting out a scream that hurt his chest, and it ran off. Now every time he closes his eyes to sleep, all he sees is this monster in his dreams. Now he hasn't slept in days. I tried to assure him that we were safe and that eventually those feelings would pass, but again, for more weeks, he declined further and further. Marty and I had to leave for school before Steve. It wasn't until the Thanksgiving break when we got home that we had learned that Steve had not gone off to school at all. In fact, he wasn't doing very well at all. My parents didn't want to say anything that would make me distracted from school, but when I went over to see him, his father said it would only be for a short visit, as Steve was not mentally well these days. He said he had gone downhill right after our trip, and the doctors can't figure it out. Sometimes at night he screams out. As I went in to see my friend, the first thing I noticed was all the medication bottles all over the room. He sat, staring out the window, not moving or talking. I said hello to him, and I tried to get him to talk, but he just looked away and back out the window. That was where I left my friend. I returned to school, and before I got back for the summer, Steve had gone into full-time care at the hospital. Marty and I could never really figure it out. Some years after I graduated from college, I had heard that Steve had managed to hang himself in the hospital. The note read one word: Sasquatch. Well, this trio thought they had won the sighting encounter lottery until the scary Bigfoot showed up. Just when you think everything's all Brady Bunch, the real danger is around you. Thanks for listening. I'm Reverend Jeff, and may the Squatch be with you.